All right, good afternoon everyone. Next up is Alper. He's going to talk about some ideas to move Debian Installer forward. Please give him a round of applause.
Hello, I'm Alper, Debian maintainer from Turkey. I've been trying to add Debian installer support for Chromebook hardware for a few years now. It has been a challenge, and I have helped enable the graphical installer for ARM64 as part of that, which is one of the big initial contributions of mine to the installer system. I'm I'm a member of the installer team group on Salsa, and last year I did a talk about titled A Guided Tour to Debian Installer Development, where I tried to explain all this stuff, how all this stuff works. And I think I kind of know how this stuff works. So another feature of mine is that I'm very much a perfectionist. That's also causing problems for me. When I do something, I pay less attention to how pragmatic it is. When I see something, I internally criticize and obtain a result of something it should be, but that might not be useful to anyone. So even then, I kind of want things to be like that on principle, kinds of like that. Makes my life hard, and it's making my life hard in the installer context as well. So when I say ideas to move installer forward, do I mean more features? What kinds of features and all that? That's yes. There are a lot of things that other distros are doing and we are falling behind on, but I don't want this to be a list of why Debian installer sucks and why we aren't doing better kind of talk. I want it to focus on architectural changes so that we can make make development of these features very, very easy instead of the current situation, which is some very complicated system that has been around for more than 20 years. I really don't know the history, but it's been a long, it has been designed for constraints that are mostly no longer applicable, and currently the biggest blocker against that is, I think, that the Debian installer is an operating system, an entire different ecosystem than Debian that requires knowledge of Debian packaging, and on top of that, it's slightly different than Debian packaging, and you also need to know these things. And there are parts that have their own module system, and you also need to get into knowing this. So there's this huge steep learning curve that is due to how it is architectured, that is similar to Debian, but quite different. We have the distinction of deb packages and microdeb, udeb packages, where things are very much stripped down so that it could fit on a floppy disk from 20 years ago. That was the intention, and it's stuck through time. apt has a clone called Anna that is very, again, restricted in functionality and size. DPackage, micro DPackage. There's this DebConf package configuration system in Debian and the corresponding C implementation of it, which is further stripped down and becomes a udeb. Instead of core utils, DI uses busybox, and when constructing a Debian system, you would debootstrap it and it would install the essential list of packages. But on the Debian installer side, we have this Debian installer build system that unpacks udebs itself. And most of the skeleton of the root system is something called root scale. And if it's graphical, it's root scale GTK. And since it's a different operating system, like a distinct one, everything we need to use, every application needs their own udeb version. Every library they use needs to have their udeb version. Linux kernel itself needs to be in a udeb version that is also very much split out into multiple packages. That also causes problems. The analog of display manager and the desktop environment are called main menu, which is when you boot a Debian installer system, you get a menu essentially. If you are in the expert mode. If you are not in the expert mode, the menu starts executing its steps one by one, and it's like a display manager in that sense, but it doesn't let you do anything. And the graphical environment is the DebConf GTK, and we can think of the installer steps as applications that this system runs. These udebs, as I said, you need to know Debian packaging, and on top of that, how Debian installer modifies the Debian packaging paradigm. Like there's this Debian control file that defines the package, but on the Debian installer side, the installer steps are packages, and whether you can install a package or not depends on if you've installed the dependencies of that package. Whether you can skip a step depends on whether something else you have installed provides the same thing of that package, and things like that. It affects control flow in that sense. There is the installable thing which determines menu visibility. If you return false, it doesn't show up on the menu and isn't configurable, installable. And when you run an installer step, what happens is that the main menu configures that package for that step, which runs the post-installation script, which has the majority of the work, majority of the installation work, and it triggers UI elements, questions to ask, and all that stuff. The questions are themselves in the Debian templates file, similar to how you would install a package in Debian and sometimes get a configuration screen asking a question. That's the same kind of idea, but it's more complicated on the Debian installer side. Sometimes packages also communicate with each other through these Debian templates. Packages store configuration for themselves, then it gets tangled up. All the other files go into the file system, and Debian installer build system packs everything up in an initfs system that's essentially the rootfs of our operating system. So these during the post-inst script, the UI is essentially controlled by that post-inst script. So I've drawn up some diagrams like this to explain it. There's during the initialization, during the boot sequence, the init of our operating system runs Debian installer. Debian installer runs some drop-in script files, which eventually runs DebConf and causes DebConf to run main menu, which then main menu itself talks to DebConf, sometimes executes post-inst scripts which talk to DebConf over the same standard input-output channels. And a quirk is that these udebs can also install other udebs, so we have this recursive descent of madness. Then eventually these udebs can install actual packages onto the system which can ask users questions. This is an important point. Like I said, the major problem, I think, is this operating system being an operating system instead of Debian Installer being an application on top of an ordinary Debian system. So to reach that, like, we need a way to migrate from udebs to using non-udebs, ordinary Debian packages. And essentially, we need to normalize this Debian installer specific functionality. We need to take the magic out of it and turn these into simple containers of files. In the main menu sources, what it does is it checks for this is installable script and executes it, and depending on that, it decides whether to show the step or continue into the step or not. And at another place, we have this exec ud package configure force configure package thing that actually runs the post-inst script by delegating that to ud package. I think these two places can be used to move these files somewhere else and add, like we can add some checks here that will check some drop-in files, and then we can move the maintainer scripts to that drop-in file location, so we can avoid running the scripts while packages are installed and have control over when the scripts are run. Like, essentially, right now, at the same place, but executed not by the fact that the package is installed or configured, but a conscious choice for the main menu to run the scripts. After that, we can also handle the step dependencies in main menu. We need some way of transferring the information from Debian control file into the main menu system, which can again be some drop-in files for main menu to parse instead of control fields that Anna needs to handle. Like there's this depends and provides, which are most important, and installer menu item. This installer menu item can be replicated by, say, prefixing the post-inst script with a number, for example. Depends can be a collection of symbolic links inside the directory between the different post scripts, things like that. Then what we have left is a conflict between udeb content and Debian proper files. Like since this is DI is an operating system, it installs things under its own root, and the udeb version of a package conflicts with the non-udeb version of that package. So we need to resolve that conflict, and we also need to resolve conflicts between different udebs that might provide the same thing. So I'm thinking we could move them into a Debian installer udebs/package directory, so all of them are guaranteed to not conflict. And we also need a list of files that the udeb will install that can be used to collect the files and generate the initramfs while we are working on it. Can symbolically link those to a rootfs directory so that installing the udebs themselves assemble a rootfs system for us at a fixed location. And while creating the Debian installer in initramfs, we can symbolically link that directory to the root so that installing udebs installs them inside the Debian installer environment to the Debian installer root. The next, like this, a bit of a convoluted thing. I'm not sure if all of it is needed, but this would get it into a state where we have simple containers of files that do not conflict with anything in Debian proper, and that would continue to work in Debian installer environment. At that point, like, we can talk about should we move things udebs to debs literally. On the build system side, which also uses udebs, we would need to prepare to stop doing that. Like, instead of installing udebs to a rootfs we are about to prepare, we would extract them all to a common location and then use the file lists that I mentioned to copy things into rootfs directories for whatever flavor we are trying to build. And since the build system also relies on the depends provides things of the udebs, we would have to read, parse them, and change the udeb lists for that accordingly. So after doing that, we have this temporary state of coexistence of like co-installability, let's say. But we could move towards that temporary coexistence state of udebs and debs, where we can upload copies of udebs as debs. Then, like, most of them would fall into the deb version of that package, like libraries and applications, and the rest are main menu items and installer steps. But at this point, still, the installer would need udebs at runtime, so we would need to keep the udebs for a little while more. And we can modify the installer build system to that we have just prepared. We can, instead of downloading udebs, add these udeb sourced debs to, like, udeb converted debs to the build depends, so the files that it would download and extract are already there. So, but still, as the installer needs udeb, we would need to mark them as installed in the package status files. And we can continue to make things smaller by coalescing installer-related udebs, like main menu steps and templates and partman and all of that. It might be necessary, it might be okay to merge them into a single source deb and binary deb. I'm not sure if this is necessary, but it's an idea to consider if, like, when something comes up. At that point, we would have both udebs and debs with similar contents in the archive, so it might be possible to make the main menu script and the rest of the process run on both systems for testing the hypothesis of whether it will work or not. Then the main menu also has ANA install and apt install things that depend on udebs. So we would need to override that on Debian systems. We would need to override ANA install to install packages using apt, so that main menu might work on a Debian system. After confirming that it can work like that, we can migrate the installer away from udebs by replacing ANA with apt and ud package with dpackage and all the other installer specific stuff with Debian specific stuff. Maybe we might need to do that atomically, and I really don't know where to, what problems might come up here, and that would essentially almost complete the udeb migration. I don't know if there's anything left at that point. Another idea that I have with the Debian installer is moving it towards the server-client architecture. Right now, it's a single program that's like a Debian installer, DebConf main menu. It's a single sequence of things that communicate over text channels. Post-inst scripts talk to DebConf, which shows menus, things like that. You can take control of that information flow at the main menu program, and then we can split it into two there. So we would have a hypothetical DI server that handles all the installation stuff, and a DI client that handles all the front-end stuff, and which would communicate over a simple text channel that is the DebConf protocol. We could then wrap this protocol in any sort of tunnel we want, which would be useful in certain use cases. We can, there's the idea of putting this Debian installer in a chroot environment. As I said before, we could arrange things at a varlib Debian installer rootfs kind of thing, and we might be able to run that without the udeb migration in a Debian system. If that doesn't work out, we might try something like this. We can, at that point, if we have the client-server infrastructure, we can split the client part out of the chroot into the proper Debian system, and we would basically save one part of it, migrate one part of it onto the Debian system instead of staying on the Debian installer server, the OS. And this intermediary channel, we can wrap it in some, this is DebConf protocol that handles configuration and questions and things like that. But at this point, if we control things, we can wrap that in another layer of something like JSON, or and we can extend that non-DebConf part of the communication protocol we choose, while restricting and making the DebConf part smaller. If we want to migrate to something else, then we could incrementally rewrite things to not depend on DebConf. We could insert some third program in between that slowly tries to replace the chroot environment with an independent rewrite, and things like that. This might be useful for. We might want to have Debian installer on a live system as a maybe a live flavor of Debian installer might be something good to move towards, instead of having the Debian installer build its own system itself. Instead of an initramfs, we could create a squashfs of the root file system, and we could use the existing live infrastructure to generate something that will boot that squashfs, and we might even have it as a proper flavor for live images. I'm not an expert on the live system, so this might be nonsense. I don't know. I'm sorry if it is. Other than that, if we manage to move from a Debian installer OS to a Debian installer application, we can easily run run it on any desktop environment like the Calamares installer, which makes things quite simpler to run and test. And while running the installer, we could also run Firefox to show an installer guide, and while waiting, people could do other work. Those kinds of things. There's things about Partman, the partitioning manager. Might be easier to work with if we merge everything into Partman, and if we do the post-inst drop-in file changes in main menu, we can adjust the protocol that we use to communicate between main menu and the thing that main menu runs, Partman. We could migrate that away from DebConf into something more palatable, and then we can try to partially rewrite DebConf things out of Partman to make it simpler, and at that point it can turn into a non-DebConf, non-UI application that handles partitioning that can be run in another system. Or we might kind of replace its core things with other things, like it uses some custom parted server thing. We might replace it with SF disk. That would be easier to work with. There has been a Grow Light presentation a few years ago that was trying to replace Partman in Debian Installer, if I remember correctly. Another partitioning tool it was another partitioning tool essentially for the Debian Installer. Or we can try to independently re-implement a partitioning tool to replace it. It's very hard to work with because of its module system that I could mostly copy files from other Partman modules and modify them, but something that should be simple as 5 to 6 lines is about 10 different files of 50 lines of stuff, because it's all convoluted, and it hurts maintainability and sustainability of maintenance. There's ideas about DebConf-based UI that I have, which is like this. Debian Installer is basically this very wide, well, at least the graphical part is very wide, not very appealing system. Text mode is better at graphical design, but it's bad at being graphical. So let's say, because it has centered images with centered text with significant white space, but this is just a full screen, very long lines, not really something enjoyable. There are some quirks with how DebConf UI is used, how it has to be used, the types of things it supports. For example, this partitioning screen, the space that I've highlighted here is actually a choice for the partitioner. You can select this, press enter, and it will refresh because it asks, it answers the question, and the script checks that the answer is empty and asks the question again. If you look a bit down, there's right arrows for each row of the table. That's not a table. It's just text, like space greater than space 1.0 megabytes. That's all manually aligned and stuff. There's things like this task cell thing where you can uncheck the Debian desktop environment thing and still select the GNOME, which is like this is supposed to be a tree of choice. the tree of choices, where if you disable this desktop environment thing, you shouldn't be able to choose the others. Or if you choose this desktop environment and do not choose any of the sub-items, the first sub-item gets installed automatically because of package dependencies. And this graphical program is also an installer-specific thing. We happen to have a non-installer version of these DebConf front ends, which is like this is the apparently KDE front end for DebConf, which is like something I like more than compared to the previous one. Even this isn't really that good, but imagine this on a desktop environment instead of the previous one. I personally would prefer this a bit better. We can make use of more automation, and we could make things easier because as in the usability study in the last session, there are many questions where the defaults, where we could invent the default that makes sense, but we do not. Like this host name question usually has Debian as the default or nothing as default, I don't remember. But other operating systems usually don't even ask this question and generate a random name, desktop dash something, because it doesn't really isn't really seen as something that matters to the user at that time. There's this HTTP proxy question that is being asked. There's this mirror question that is being asked, and we could automatically discover proxies and fill this information. We are not doing that. You could automatically choose a mirror. We are not doing that, asking the user to choose that. And we essentially, more defaults, better defaults, and hide the questions that have defaults. There's one thing that I can get from that usability study in the last session. And server-client architecture, as I said, it would help automation a lot because you can just run the server on a single board computer, for example, and have a client that automatically configures the server to install the to answer the questions and install Debian Installer. It is hard to run Debian Installer on single board computers and weird devices. That could be made easier by providing images that set up Wi-Fi hotspots and serve a web page for the Debian Installer. We could, or like, automatically open up SSH version of Debian Installer over an Ethernet connection. But these need some discoverability as well. Like we could add Avahi stuff, MDNS, to broadcast to the network that there's a Debian Installer server running on this machine that the client can connect to and configure. We should have better customization options for derivatives and ourselves, even for blends and well, there are weird kinds of devices that I would like Debian Installer to be used on, but that they aren't used on these. People just create Debian images with debootstrap or something and customize it on their device. Create a fixed disk image, then publish it on the internet, saying, yeah, this image works, use this type. It would be nice in principle if you could put a Debian Installer image on that, and it would, for example, launch the screen, the QR code we can read to connect to the Debian Installer, or on the SBC side, you would open up Debian installer on serial connection, on Ethernet connection, and you can open up a web browser to configure that. There are things to customize for the derivatives and blends, which are branding, and like for these weird devices, you usually need custom kernels and images. That's quite hard to achieve. We would want to customize package sources, selections, and different, some derivatives might want to add different installer steps and questions and defaults. These are basically very hard to add at this stage. Like I've been working on Chromebooks, and while starting this, I would have to do two things. I would have to modify partitioning system. I would have to add an installer step, and I would have to install a package onto the system. So to install that package onto the target system, I would have to put that deb package into a udeb package that I would have to supply at the Debian installer build process. But that isn't enough, because doing that means it would have to happen after installation and after the base installation. And if you try to load that udeb as during the build process, it would install the dependencies for the installer udebs, which would make the size explode, and which would mark the installation as half complete, and it would break things. So I would have to wrap that udeb in another udeb that would execute at the start of the Debian installer to prepare to install the inner udeb at a certain point where it can avoid interfering the rest of like that shouldn't be necessary. I should be able to just drop the deb file and udeb file somewhere on the USB disk, and it should be able to look that up and install it and configure it. And even that is very complex. Like I shouldn't need to know any Debian packaging to add a question, add a script that runs. There's this late command thing, but it's at a limited, it runs at a limited stage. There's pre-seed, but it cannot add questions, and it's very like complicated to think about, and sometimes I'm not really making sense. But let me move on from that to what we can do with the build system. I would like to have reproducibility, so that we could have more easier time refactoring things and being confident that we are not breaking the build system. That's the priority I would have. We should decouple independent builds of independent flavors. Right now, everything is trying to build at the same place, which means you can run only one of them at a time, which means you do not get parallelization. You can split those, run things in parallel, which would improve build speed and help us iterate faster on installer development. I couldn't get cross-compilation to work. I would have to use a cross architecture root to run like QEMU system, run the ARM version of the root to build a Debian installer system for ARM. That slows things down very much. I'd like to have that fixed. One of the problems is that make targets are architecture specific, and then like you can not even perceive that there's an ARM64 specific target on the AMD 64 specific computer. we could, like, the Linux source package has some interesting architecture that they use to have this cross-compilation setup. We could get inspired by that and try to adjust the installer build system for that. That's that's a lot of ideas that I'm trying to throw on the stage. I don't know how many of them make sense. I don't know if these should be done at all. I do not care if these solve a problem or do not solve a problem in terms of what a user of Debian installer wants from Debian installer. Like, I see these things as in terms of principle, that I have a feeling that they should be done, and it's like, I've rambled on long enough, I think. The other question is, like, is this worth doing? Should I go ahead with this, or should we consider alternative systems to appropriate from other distributions, maybe from Ubuntu, maybe from somebody else, and something other developers are working on? Like, should we start from scratch? Basically, I have no idea. I'm trying this talk as a conversation starter in that sense. And so, yeah, thank you for listening. I could take questions, but I'm afraid to. Please don't be harsh on me.
Thank you, Alper. Any questions or comments? Yeah, there at the front.
Hi. First of all, thank you. Thank you for this talk. It was really informative for me. I don't know, like, 1% of what you presented, though I'm very interested in the topic, but I feel like I don't have the skills to help. But first thing is just, I think we must be very grateful for all your work and just the time and energy that you've put just to brainstorm. If this is the beginning of a conversation, I'm happy with the beginning, and let's move forward and see who else we can bring that has the skills, and so where is the team, and in our community who could contribute to this conversation to really get more concrete, and because you really addressed many issues that we face from the user's perspective, and having the basic principle of having the installer running as an application instead of OS, and that's pretty much what we've concluded. Like, because when I say, we've compared Calamares with the Debian installer, actually we are comparing the user experience is that Calamares is an application on top of a running system, and so we could replace in my talk, every time I say Calamares, you could think of this could be Debian installer as an application, and yeah, that's my comment. It was not a question, just one thing is just thank you. I'm grateful for your work, and be brave. don't need to fear that you're on the right track, I think.
Yeah, I also have a lot to say, but a few minutes is not enough, so I'll make a blog post instead in reply to your talk. But is there any other? We have 1 minute left if there's another question or comment. Nope. Well, I agree with Dacia. Be brave, and thanks for everything. Thanks.
Thank you.